So what did y'all discover, I guess, as you were walking through then? Are they the same? Are they different? What makes them different? If they are. So we have both the same. Same. Anyone say different? You say different? Well, it's really, I mean, it's definitely the sort of thing that makes you look closer. Even though on first glance you're like, oh, black shapes, no big deal. But when you start really trying to figure it out and look at the shapes and how they fit together, it kind of causes you to go in for a closer look, right? In a way that maybe you hadn't thought about. So they actually are very different. And when you can walk through a little bit easier maybe, you might be able to kind of start picking out some of the different shapes there. But he might have done some that are the same. The really interesting background story of Tony Smith is that he actually worked as an architect before he was a sculptor. And he worked for Frank Lloyd Wright, a very famous architect. And he was very interested at that point on modular housing and the idea of creating affordable housing that can be put together on site in interesting ways where, like, it would be similar but different for each house depending on how you stuck them together, right? So that was very influential in Smith's sculpting, which is kind of modular in form. Like, it could have very easily been the same. This one's different, but others, you know, are working with other pieces that are very similar. So Jordan actually repaint it right now, but it is several thousands and thousands of dollars to do so because it has to be this very particular paint. So we're in the middle of that. So next time you see this, hopefully we'll have a nice flat black image for that. Asked you guys to describe what you saw, and on that one it was definitely more geometric, and we had words like Tetris and we had words like elves. I don't think we're going to have those kinds of words here, so let's kind of start with a brainstorming session of what is it that we are looking at on this piece. A guy without a head. Okay, so we have a headless figure. What else?
I see a lot of, I mean, I got just a lot of texture. Like, everything looks like if you ran your fingers over it, it feels really cool.
Don't run your fingers over.
Oh, no.
But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of texture to this piece. Come on in closer, everyone. Like that kind of plastery texture. Yeah, like it's kind of been pieced together.
Is it bronze?
He's balanced on a beam. It is a bronze face, yeah.
It totally looks like plastic.
Was his head knocked off or was it built that way?
It was built that way. Yeah, good question. This was all on purpose. So we have a figure in the middle of a beam that is balancing on, what do these look like? Like logs. Okay, so we have some natural elements from the natural world. We have a figure with a lot of texture. Let's move around to the back. Figure has huge feet. Part of that's to help him balance. Physically, for the sculpture not to fall over. It is hollow in the back. And also the texture changes. It goes from like a plaster, kind of like a burlap type of texture in the front, to how would you guys describe what's going on in the back of the figure? Smooth. Seams. Okay, so we've got some seams, kind of all horizontal striped in there, right?
It's much more orderly.
It is. So we can think of this as the back or the inside, too, of the piece. Let's go around to the front and I'll kind of help a little bit with some background on the figure and on the artist for some interpretation on this one. So it is, although it's a definitely more recognizable sculpture, like you can actually tell what it is, right? It's figurative. It's still kind of a perplexing piece, right? Because there's a lot of questions that arise. Like, what questions do you guys have, David? Why is there no head? Yeah, that's a great question. Any other questions?
Why is it hollow?
Why is it hollow? Okay. So hopefully I'll be able to answer those questions for you. Not completely though, I'm sure. Ava Kanowitz is a Polish artist, and she was working in Poland during the time of communism and when the Russians had basically taken over Poland. And she herself was actually forced to flee her home with her family. She saw one of her siblings get murdered at the time, so she lived a very, very tough childhood. And as an artist in that kind of an environment, there's a lot of restrictions on what you can actually physically do without getting in trouble, right? Arrested or worse. And so as an artist at that time, basically if you wanted to be an artist that was out in the public, you had to do something called social realism. which is basically propaganda art. So like those sorts of posters that you see sometimes in kind of historical situations where it's basically glorifying the republic that they're in, right? She did not want any part of that, especially having a violent takeover like she lived through. And so she chose instead to go completely abstract and work only in textiles. So she became a person who did weavings, very big on fabrics, right? And instead of doing weavings and fabrics that you would like use as a blanket, she did fabrics and weavings that you would use as artwork. So these giant tapestries that would hang over walls or that would even kind of stand up on themselves and be sculptural pieces. This was all done very privately though. On the one hand, she's like, oh, I'm just making textiles, I'm a woman, it's okay. But on the other hand, it was very subversive, you know, and actually kind of dangerous for her to be doing these things. And she worked that way until they were granted artistic freedom in Poland. And so at that point, when she was allowed to basically be out in public with her artwork, she goes, yeah, that's cool, I'm going to switch and do things with figures now. And so basically she changed her mind a little bit, but took what she knew with textiles. I mean, you can really see that influence in her work, right? If you're wondering about why you see this texture, it comes from her previous work. At that point, she kind of moved towards things that were a little bit more commentary on on the idea of the human condition at that point. And a lot of her sculptures are done in series. So this one's a single figure, but oftentimes you'll find 20 or 30 of them all lined up in maybe 2 or 3 rows, all standing side by side like an army. And sometimes they'll be missing their feet or missing their hands, or like you see on this one, missing their head. And they're all kind of anonymous, right? Like this isn't a sculpture of a particular person. It's just a figure. And so that idea of anonymity, and this could be anyone or everyone, maybe somebody who's been, whose identity has been taken away, because your head is like a lot of times how you recognize someone, right? So if you take that away, you're kind of left with a more of an anonymous figure. And so she might have felt, growing up in that environment, that these armies at the time treated everyone as if they were anonymous, or that if you were in an army at that point, you were an anonymous soldier. And so she takes a lot of this into her artwork now to create pieces like this as commentary. Now, with that being said, kind of helps solve the head problem. What about the hollow problem? Or not problem, question. How does that affect what you guys think of the hollow part of the person?
Makes me think of a shell.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to expand on that?
So something empty, something that once existed and now soft.
Video piece.
But we will also be considering the figure. So.
Ooh, nice transition, Sarah. So we're going to head down to the art building next to the Visual Arts Center that is brand new. So